Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about tight deadlines. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, how do you plan ahead to meet tight deadlines? Well, it's sort of, if it's just me, or if it's a team, I do things slightly different. Like it's at the end of the day, it's sort of the same base structure with a few changes. But let's start with the basics first and foremost. It doesn't matter if it's just me or if it's a team that's gonna do it, which is to break things down into priorities when there's a tight deadline. In other words, always work on the thing that creates the most amount of value in the shortest amount of time. That is in a sense the agile way of doing it also, and it's in a sense the way that you do MVP and so forth. The reason behind this is because when you think in terms of what's always bringing the most amount of value in the shortest amount of time, you're setting yourself up for an organic delivery structure that is basically guaranteeing you that the only thing that determines if you meet the deadline, or like by how well are you gonna solve this problem, is basically down to, do you have everything that you need? Do you have the knowledge? Do you have the time? Because the reality is that sometimes you might have a tight deadline, but in practice it's impossible for you to meet it. But if you always work on the thing that is most important, brings the most amount of value in the shortest amount of time, then at the very least at the end of it you will have something that feels meaningful, like you will be closer to the mark than if you start working on things that may block. Or an example that I like to take with people, that it's not the perfect example of it, but I hope that you can sort of see the point to this. If you're building a full stack application type of thing, right, and you start working on both the front end and the server at the same time, when you're done, if you don't meet the time, if you don't have the time to actually finish the thing, the application, depending on how you structured it, may be completely useless because you can't really interact with it. You can't really do anything. I'm just assuming that there's going to be a user who's going to interact with it, right? However, had you started with the front end and only shipped the front end experience, you may have been able to give it, even though the backend system isn't working, you may have been able to give the user a sensation of more value if you had done it that way. If, let's say, that you were making a microservice in an ecosystem like a SOA system or something like that, and the most important thing is that there is some type of communication between that system and another system, well, and there should be some type of interface on top of it that can administrate, like it's a secondary thing, right? Then the thing you should be focusing on is making sure that that part works, because that is the thing, that's the only thing. If you can only have time to fix one thing, that's the thing that is most important. And when you break things down into these sorts of this sort of structure, that means that you have a very clear overview of, okay, what is number one priority, number two priority, etc., etc. Even though you need to do everything, there's always ways for you to slice it so that you're always focusing on the thing that brings the most amount of value. This is how I do it pretty much every time. It's when I do it for myself as well. The main difference here between when you're working as like a solo developer and when you work with a team is that you need to make sure that all the developers in the team have a clear understanding of these priorities. It's the way that I like to think about it is that when you have a plan and you share that with a group of people, it's very important for you to make sure that they all have the same picture in their head of what's going to happen next, that they feel committed enough to this task, especially if it's a high priority one, that they're all synchronized on how to do this thing. Each and every one of them should be in line. It's sort of like, in those movies where they do the clock check, they all synchronize their watches. That's the thing that you're going for. Everybody should know that well, Jane, she's going to pick up that bottleneck story that is needed because otherwise Bob and Sharon or whoever, they can't start working on the other stuff that they should be doing, which is also high priority. That means that she has a little bit of extra pressure in the beginning because she's a blocker right now, but that also means that everybody is aware of that as soon as she needs the code review, she gets the code review immediately. There's no like doing something else or something like that. She has her support the second she needs it. I make a habit of making that very clear to everybody that I work with, because when it's high pressure situations, this is actually one of the reasons why I try to reference the military in these sorts of situations. When people have stress and anxieties and so forth, and pressure and so forth, the clarity of the instructions and execution order of what you need to be doing needs to be it needs to be really solid within them. And the best way for you to do that is to do the thing that I'm talking about. It's the same thing in sports or whatever. Everybody has a role to play within the team, and on an average day, you might not have a tight deadline or something like that. You don't have to be in this high performance state where serious collaboration needs to take place. But when you are in those sorts of situations, it's very important that everybody comes together and has a very clear understanding of not just what they're working on, what the coworker is working on, and whether or not that thing is more important than the thing that they do. Because one of the things that really makes it difficult to meet sharp deadlines is when you have this decoupling within the team. And I've worked in many teams, guys, where you don't have daily stand-ups, you don't talk ever, like you can go several days without having even a conversation with your coworkers within the same team. They barely know that the other people exist within the team. This is very dangerous because in these sorts of situations, you're not a team. You're a group of individuals who are just picking up arbitrary stories, and making people come together in situations like this is nigh on impossible if that is the way that things are being run. And that's why when I at the very least have the role of making sure that people work as a team, I actually put these things in place fairly early on, where there is there is no room for lone wolf mentalities or like people who don't collaborate in these such situations, because when things like this happen and multiple people are necessary in order to meet a sharp deadline, it is very important that all the conversations that needs to take place for people to feel comfortable with effective communication has happened way before. As you can imagine, if you have a bunch of people who barely ever talk to each other, now they really have to come together and really work together and like really work closely together. Well, it's like when you meet a stranger or like when you're doing small talk. It takes a while for people to get comfortable interacting with each other. And if that time happens when shit is hitting the fan, well, in the military people die. And in our case, we don't meet the deadline. So what I want you to take away from this is that the way that I usually plan ahead for tight deadlines is that I take a look at the cadence structure, or like what has to happen before the next thing can happen. How do I get the most amount of value out the door in the shortest amount of time? Because you can always slice it up to a certain point, of course, and that's how I always start. Which means that you sort of have to understand how to plan things and like do like these sorts of, I'm not saying agile practices, but you need to understand how to basically work in a modern fashion. Well, it is an agile work practice system in essence. You have to sort of understand how to do that. The second part is that if you're working with multiple people, you have to have had an investment in them working together and prioritizing the value of what you are doing above whatever the fuck they are doing. Because if you don't do that, guys, you will see it. I promise you will see it. And if you haven't already, you will notice it very quickly. If you take a look at how fast someone picks up a new story or does something related to themselves versus helping out with a code review or something like that, on average you will see that software developers always prioritize their own work, their own deliverables, and like their own bubble, if that makes sense, when they work, even as part of a team. And that is one of the things that you try to break when you're a tech lead or a manager or something like that. You're trying to help them work in a collaborative fashion, because when things like this happen and they really need to trust each other, they really need to be able, not, it's not just about trust, it's about functioning, like having that comfort with each other. That does not happen magically. Humans don't work that way. You don't take usually a bunch of people, strangers, put them in a high pressure situation and then force them all to work together efficiently. Some people can deal with that, but a lot of people need some time to grow accustomed to each other. That has to happen, and then every single person needs to know what is highest priority. In other words, they are not here to just do something and then, yeah, I did my part. That's not how it works when you do these sorts of things. The way it works is that you know that that person is working on the most important thing. The only reason you're not helping out is because you can only effectively be one person on that thing. The second you are in that is unblocked, you drop whatever the hell you're doing and you start helping out. That's the sort of thing that you're going for. You're trying to get them to work as basically a football team, to understand that, yeah, you're not just here to run around, you're here to get the ball into the net. Have a great day.